Okay, looks like you're trying to get in now. I'll let you in. All right. Well, let's get started. I'll kick us off with a word of prayer. How does that sound? All right. Father, we want to give thanks that you have sent Christ Jesus, your Son. We thank you that we have eternal life in him. We thank you, Father, that you are building a church and that you've given us the opportunity to assist you in this work, to be used by you for service. We pray, Father, that the things that we study and learn, that diligent, efficient, thoughtful about how we can make the best impacts of Christ and to encourage your church and to build your church up. We pray even tonight. We pray that you would help us to have understanding, to retain, learn. I pray that you would help us to communicate clearly. As the Apostle Paul says, we do not desire to beat against the air, but we want to be effective, to be able to minister. We know that our time is limited, and at any moment, Father, we know that we could see Christ our Savior, and that we could be ushered into his presence, and we know that because of those things, we need to be diligent to serve, diligent to take advantage of the opportunities you've given us, and that's what we desire to do. And so we lift this up in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so chapter 10, and now we'll get into sort of the familiar cadence where I'll start with some review. So we'll look at chapter 9. I would have liked to have gone back further, but I want to keep tonight to a reasonable time. Let me see if I can minimize this. Hopefully that didn't stop the recording. I X'd out of something here on the screen. But you still can see me on your screens, I'm hoping? Okay. So let's look at some of the basics from chapter 9. We were looking at Greek pronouns. Let's start with the personal pronouns. And in fact, as we often do, and I think this is really effective, is for us to drill a little bit and reinforce it. So let's go through the personal pronouns. As you remember, there is number and person for the personal pronouns. And so we're going to go through the singular number down through each of the persons, first, second, and third. And you can first repeat after me, and then we'll go through them together. So ego, which is the first person singular. Second person singular is Sue. Second person singular, Sue, with the upsilon and the accent. Remember the strong accent over the upsilon. Second person singular. Third person singular, autos. And not included in this chart here, but the feminine form would be aute. Aute. Let's hear that. Tommy, let's hear it. Aute. Okay, very good. And then the neuter would be auto. So everyone all together. Third person, singular, neuter, auto. Very good. All right. Now let's go through the personal pronouns in the plural. So again, we'll begin with the first person, plural, personal pronoun in English, which we would translate as we. In Greek, it is hemes. Hemes. Hemes with the circumflex. Notice it with the two consonants together there, the consonant cluster, that the circumflex falls over the second vowel, right? So you have epsilon, iota, and you see the circumflex there over the iota. So once again, first person plural, personal pronoun, hemes. All together, hemes. Very good. Okay, second person, personal pronoun in the plural, humes. Okay, all together, humes. Okay, we'll add that inflection or that pitch accent there. So that would be you all. Some parts of the U.S. actually yens. I have some friends from Pittsburgh. I don't know if you ever heard that. So second person plural, and all together again, humes. Humes. Okay, very good. Third person plural, autoi. Autoi. Okay. And we can actually do the feminine too, which would be autai, and the neuter, which would be auta. There we go. All right. So pronouns agree with the antecedents. Remember, the antecedent is the noun or the substantive to which the pronoun refers. A substantive is anything that functions like a noun. So you're going to see that participles oftentimes, we'll get there, participles will oftentimes function as nouns. So these are substantives. Substantives include anything that can be the subject of the sentence, nouns, or noun-like constructions. They agree both with the gender and the number, but in most cases, the case will be based on their function, right? So if the personal pronoun, functions in the accusative case, then you'll find that personal pronoun in the accusative, but occasionally there can be some rare exceptions to that, mostly with relative pronouns, which we looked at a few examples of. Okay, so this is important, and right away I see a mistake here, which is so egregious that I'm actually going to take a split second and fix. I did have 3 uses, but I think it's actually important to break it down into 4 uses of autos as the personal pronoun, and I've been working on this up until this week and wanted to make sure that we were really clear on this, okay? So a personal pronoun, again, personal pronoun, he, she, it, I, we, these are pronouns which in English, as in Greek, refer back to the noun. However, what we said is that in Greek it's optional. Okay, so Greek is what we would call a null subject language. And that's technical terminology from linguistics. It simply says most of the time, we don't find the personal pronoun explicitly stated, right? And remember that we said that's because the conjugation gives us person, voice, mood, right? It gives us the information that we have specifically in the personal pronouns, number and person, right, that we're referring to. And so the personal pronoun is optional in the base form in the Greek, right? We don't need it. However, there are emphatic forms. So autos ho kurios, actually, let's all say that together. Autos ho kurios, the Lord himself. So we oftentimes translate that in English with what is oftentimes the reflexive pronoun in English is himself, right? However, that can be used emphatically, and this null subject is intensified. Now, the important thing to recognize with this emphatic, so Tommy, how are you going to distinguish between the emphatic and the intensive, which is the next case here, next category? In the emphatic, you have, this is the thing, both the substantive, typically a noun, could be, as in this case, a proper noun, and then also the personal pronoun. Do you see that? So we have autos, which is the personal pronoun, and we have kurios, okay, which is the subject. In this case, it's a proper noun, right?
But the wording is exactly the same.
The wording is not the same as in English, but even
in the Greek from these 2 examples, I'm not seeing any variation.
Oh, I see. Let's see what we got going on here. Oh, okay. Yes. So, yeah, sorry for that. Looks like we've got, not sure what happened. Some bad proofing here. So the emphatic should be just the personal pronoun. And then the intensive should be the personal pronoun plus the substantive or the referent, right? That it's referring to.
Why would it take kurios out of it? Autos, that just tells me himself in general. Doesn't tell me it's the Lord.
Yeah, so there's a nuance that they make in your text between like this emphatic sense. So
you would need context for that one, right? So
mhm.
if it just said the Lord previously in the sentence and then it said autos, you would know it was talking about the Lord,
That's right.
but
Yeah.
not the Lord himself.
Yeah, that's right. So the previous context, yeah, it would have to be clear, it was speaking about the Lord. And then the intensive autos ho kurios, right? So here we have not you don't necessarily need any previous reference to the noun. So that's the difference. So you will see both forms in the Greek, and that's why I wanted to make sure that you were familiar with it. And then there's the identical, which we would translate as the same. So in this example, two stomatos, out of the same mouth, right? So here, it's a reference of identity back to itself, and so it would just be translated the same. This is an area that causes a lot of confusion, and so when you look at it, like the tendency of people when they're first learning personal pronouns is probably to always look at like an emphatic use case. That's sometimes the case. Sometimes it's a matter of style, and I don't know that we talked about this last time, but I think it's really important to note that you do have to look at the context in each case. When you find the personal pronoun used with the finite verb, right? So in this case, autos apen, he said, it may or may not indicate that stress in the original. And so you have to look at the context, and it's very nuanced, it's very difficult, and it's hard to prescribe exact rules for that.
Is it the same as English in the sense where you use a pronoun and it refers to the antecedent? Like
yes, it is that it is like that. But when you do use the personal pronoun, I think the tendency of most beginning translators is to automatically look at an emphatic, and it oftentimes is emphatic, but it's not necessarily he himself said. Okay, to use that first example, autos epen could just be he said. There is a little bit of stylistic variety that you'll find in the New Testament, and so that's why there's some difficulty in this. In the beginning, you'll probably be safe translating it with an emphatic sense of he himself said, right? But just be aware of that as you go on, you'll find instances where it appears in the context to be emphatic, and I wish I had a more discrete rule for you, or deterministic sort of rule, but really context has to control, and that's actually something I want to do a little bit more study on myself. According to our text, you really just look at the context, but I'm not sure in the primary literature if there's more determinism behind that, and if there is, that's something I'll bring back to you. But I've always felt that that's an area of it certainly is an area of a lot of nuance in translation. All right. Okay, then we have the relative pronouns. The relative pronouns introduce relative or dependent clauses, right? And so these are clauses that expand or provide additional sense or meaning to a noun or a pronoun. And we noted that they come with, again, both case and with gender, and also with the number, right? So that's different from the personal pronouns. They have to, you'll see there the note, they take their case function from their case function in the relative clause, and the exception to that, which I didn't put in here in the review, is when there's attraction, right? So in some cases, we'll find that the pronouns will agree with the noun to which they refer, and they don't necessarily reflect their function in that dependent clause, right? So without, maybe just one more example before we go on. And we'll actually, I think it's actually, even at this point, I think it's still better to just look at English examples and you'll get more into the Greek. But, you can have a phrase like this, he knew. This is just, random, but, he knew the man whom he had struck, right? Now, the interesting thing is that English and Greek both have this sort of inflection. And so here, this is a relative pronoun in English that's in an accusative case, right? Because it's in a direct object. So we say, and we can start to do like a little bit, we won't do diagramming, but we can start to look at some of the parts of speech here, right? So he, the personal pronoun, right? He. So this is the personal pronoun. This is our subject of the sentence, right? This person that we're talking about, the person upon whom the action of the verb is in some way related. You have your finite verb here. There are other kinds of verbs, infinitives and participles, and we're going to see those in Greek. That was. And man here is the object, right, of this this verb phrase, right? So here we have an object.
Anthropos.
Anthropon, right? So actually, this one is simple enough that I could almost have just done it in Greek, but I want you to do the grammar. It's just easier to do this. Okay. You'll find out later that this accent will probably, if this is a Greek sentence, it probably would have moved over here because of the next word being an enclitic. I think we talked about that a little bit, maybe. Yeah, we did talk about that last week. Yeah. But whom right here is the accusative, right? It's the accusative because now this whole section here, right, is a relative clause or dependent clause. Follow me? And it describes the object of the sentence, which is the man, right? Okay. So why is this in the accusative case? It's because he, again, here, let's make this a little bit more interesting. For example, let's say, John, let's just, instead of using the pronoun there, let's just say John knew the man whom he had struck. So he here refers back to John, right? Makes sense?
Yep.
And had struck, it's a past participle, but the main verbal idea here is to strike, right? So John struck the man, right? But within this dependent clause, he and John struck, right? So subject, verb, object, right? He struck the man or who, right? So here, because in the dependent clause, this is the object, you're going to see the relative pronoun take on that inflection in English, and it's a similar concept in Greek, right? So occasionally, this is not a good example to show this because this is also an accusative case here, but sometimes this personal pronoun will actually take on the inflection of the noun that comes right before it. So that's attraction. Once you start reading Greek, it's pretty simple to kind of figure out those. In most cases, it's pretty simple to figure out those relationships, and you'll see them and start to recognize that. Yeah.
So
Here's a trivial example because this is also an accusative, right? So
right, and whom is talking about the same person as the man. But is it more common for those two to match because they're talking about the same person, or for it just to take whatever the previous word is for its case?
So I don't know that there's any rule with it.
Oh, okay.
I haven't really, see, that's another good question. You know,
It's a Greek question that like,
Yeah.
I've never, because usually you would
I-
assume that they would have the same because they're talking about the same person,
mhm.
or at least the he would in the dependent clause.
Attraction is, you know, this would make a nice little research project actually. Is are there rules for it? You know, like when does it happen? I will say this, it happens in the minority of cases. So most of the time, in fact, I would say it's only a small minority of cases where the relative clause inflection is attracted back to,
The previous word.
yes, the head of the relative clause, which is the noun to which it's referring to. But are there rules around that? I'm not really sure. That there's none that I ever remember reading in a grammar, but maybe somebody's actually studied that. So I can tell you that in Koine Greek, you find this is much more common. So in New Testament Greek, you find this. I'm just making this as a note to myself because it's not really important for us, but too important for this class. But I'm kind of really curious about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so if there was another clause in between, John knew the man he was speaking to, whom he had struck, would whom still match with the man? In case probably.
Yes, that's good. So you can insert some other types of clauses in here. So let's say you put in a prepositional phrase. John knew the man from the store,
Whom he had
you know,
struck.
whom he had struck, right?
Great
So that's a
sentence.
good, that's a good observation.
Would whom still match man?
Yes.
Probably, right?
That's a good observation. So the head of the relative clause does not need to be directly connected to the referent, right? It can actually, you know, you can have an intervening clause there for sure.
And whom wouldn't be attracted to take on like something from the intervening clause?
That's another, you know, good
Because
question.
that's what I was
too,
wondering
is
is like, is it gonna take on? If there's
I've
a different
only seen
word
attraction happen in
in this way.
these cases, but that's actually another research question. Yeah, those are really good questions. You know, for our purposes here, we're of course just trying to get started to be able to translate and understand these things. But it's good that you're thinking that way. You will find some very complicated examples, you know, as you go through the New Testament. And there's certainly a lot of examples where, you know, the head of the relative clause is dislocated, you know, from its referent, its antecedent. Yeah, this does actually feel like kind of like I can hear like the sound like echoing. So
A different spot in the room.
yeah. Okay. All right, so let's move on to some of the new materials. So future indicative verbs we're going to look at today. You'll remember, like we talked about what we call tense forms, that in Greek, you know, tense is not a very good way of talking about the different categories of verbs, because tense in English, for instance, suggests time. And in reality, except in the present indicative in Greek, tense is not primarily indicated, right? It's primarily aspect, you know, how you look at an event. So we're talking about the tense form and the meaning here of future indicative verbs. And you can further break down the future tense form into some descriptive categories. So one would be the predictive future. This would predict an event, or at least signal somehow that there's a high likelihood of it happening, or an expectation that it would happen. And here's the key phrase: from the author's perspective, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean that it will happen, right? And similar to the present tense, there's nothing that prevents people from being deceptive or being mistaken about these things. But from the author's perspective, they're presenting something as taking place and as something that will happen in the future. So the example, for Matthew, 1:21, and we're going to look at the forms here in a little bit. She will bear Texatai, a son, and you shall call his name Jesus. I don't know why that one wasn't also called out, but it should be Kaleses. You will call his name Jesus, for he will save, sose, his people from their sins. And you're going to see the tense form. It's called the tense formative, the sigma there. We'll get into that in just a moment. So don't worry about the mechanics. But first, when we talk about the future, there's a predictive future. And just know that oftentimes people are trying to portray or depict what they believe is going to happen in the future. And then you can distinguish that, I think, meaningfully from an imperatival future. What's an imperative? A command, right? So the future can sometimes include this command or an exhortation. We look at Matthew chapter 4, verse 10, you shall worship. This is in the future tense in the Greek. Future active indicative, proskunesis. You shall worship the Lord your God. Then there's what you might call a deliberative future. This can be, it's typically a rhetorical sort of technique where you're not really sure about what's going to happen, or it suggests that there's some level of ambiguity or uncertainty around it. It's best to look at examples to try to explain this. And here's one from John chapter 6. Lord, to whom shall we go? Apeleu somata. And that's in the future tense. You can tell from that sigma formative there that comes between the base form and the personal ending. And so, Lord, to whom shall we go, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that, we are going to leave the Lord. It actually suggests some level of abstraction. But even in the indicative here, there's a little bit of a difference between the reality that you're portraying and this hypothetical. So in the future, you can use the indicative, this deliberative future to depict that. I think these are really easy. Like you're not going to struggle with this at all in the translation. It's just, I think these are interesting and meaningful distinctions. So when we look at the voice of the future indicative, there's essentially two forms here. So one is the lexical form that ends in omega. You remember these verbs. So luo, of course, is like the paradigm vowel. And in this case, it's very simple to tell that it's a future because of the infixed tense formative, which is the sigma, right? So luso, and you can see between the stem or the root, which in this case would be lambda epsilon, and the verbal ending, in this case, the lexical form ending of the omega, right, which happens to be the first person common singular conjugation in the present active indicative, right? That's how you're going to find in the dictionary. So between that stem and the either the lexical form or the personal ending, then you're going to insert a sigma. So luso. You with us, Sami? Sort of. Okay.
You said that.
Play it back to me. What do you think we're talking? Tell me if I'm making any sense at all.
Sigma at all in the lexical form.
Okay.
Oh, but it's in the active.
Yeah. So what we're showing on the right, maybe I should just kind of explain a little. So what we're showing on the right, yes, the left is the lexical form. On the right is how you're forming the future indicative.
Okay.
Yes, this is true in classical as well as in Koine Greek. I don't think there's any difference there. Luso, paradigm, which has an active form and active meaning, right? So if you see this form, it's always active, it's always future, and it's very easy to identify. Now, there are some, okay, so this is where it gets a little bit nuanced. Right? So there are some middle form and middle meaning verbs, right? So if you remember, even verbs that have this lexical form luo, so they have the active form, I destroy. Remember, in the middle, we talk about subject affectedness. So it has to do with the subject in some way. I lose could be I lose for myself. Luomai, remember that? Present, active, indicative. Let me. I'm realizing now when I do this again, I'm going to go back and put that the present indicative chart in here and make it easier to track with how the changes are happening here. But remember, luomai, I lose for myself, or could be, that'd be the only real way we could translate that, I think. But there's some level of like, it involves the subject, right? And so even verbs that have a lexical form where that is active, right? All you see ending in omega, sometimes they have middle forms with middle meaning, okay? Sometimes it's reflexive, sometimes it's deliberative, when you're talking about verbs of thinking. Sometimes it is, verbs of motion. Remember that? We've looked at, and that's the example we'll see here, like on the bottom here, poreuomai, where like it always involves you. If you're the subject, you're going someplace, then you're going to start in one place, you're going to end someplace else. So it's involving you. So when you have one verb that, the aluo form of verb, if it has a middle form or meaning, you will also see the infixed sigma there, right? So lusomai, you could translate that. It's kind of a difficult form, but it's I release, and sometimes I destroy, right, in the lexical form. I will loose for myself, right? That you could potentially look at it that way. Lutesomai. So this is now where we're going to start to see, and we'll come back here to this, additional tense formative here. But when you see that theta, then the theta is the indicator to you that you're looking at a passive. Okay, so this is a passive form. It is passive in meaning. It's passive in meaning, right? So again, if the lexical form is a luo type verb, and you see something that's like here, it's lutesomai. What you have is the theta, eta. That's the passive part of the tense formative, and then the sigma, right, which indicates the future. So the theta eta indicates passive, the sigma indicates the future. And in this case, it has a passive form, but sometimes it can also have a middle meaning, right? So it just depends on the verb. And so sometimes we call these you might remember sort of the mediopassive. You might have, and we talked about some of these where it's like, middle and passive. It's a passive form, but it has kind of a middle meaning. So it could be, let's say, I will be loosed, right? Or I will be loosed. Or it could be, I will be loosed for myself, right? So it just depends on, and sometimes some of the verbs like luo will be contextual, right? So it could have both a middle meaning or a passive meaning. Remember, the middle meaning kind of, related to myself, related to the subject. The passive is being acted upon, right? So I will be released by someone else, right? That's a passive sense. Now, when you have the lexical form that this is again, lexical form, you're looking it up. This is the base form that you're going to find in the dictionary. And it's the Omicron, Mu, Alpha, Iota. that form, right? That's what you find in the lexicon, means there is no active form, right? Not luo. You won't find a poriuo in the biblical text, but it's always going to be a poriuomai, right? Okay. Now, when you see, okay, so let's look at the future form on the right. It says poriusomai. So, Ben, how do we know that this verb is referring to the future? What's our clue?
Who is the sigma between the epsilon and the omicron?
That's right. So between the stem or the base and the personal ending, right? So Tommy, when you look at poriusomai, right? Can you see there the difference between poriuomai, right? So that's your lexical form on the left. And then poriusomai, do you see the difference? There's just the sigma.
Yeah.
All right. You see the difference is a sigma. Now, when you have this form, then that's always going to be a middle form in middle meaning. Okay. In other words, there is no active, future active. It's a future active of or future indicative, but not a future active of poriomai, right? So there's no poriuo with an omega, right? It's always a middle form, middle meaning. Poriusomai, so again, subject affectedness. Poriomai could be I go or come, right? So subject affected, I go or come. It means there's always something happening to me. And my position is different at the end of the action from what it was at the beginning of the action, right? So that's the sense. All right. And then there's, for these types of verbs, right, the poriuomai type lexical forms, right, where you have the omai, personal ending, omicron, mu, alpha, iota. Then there's also a passive paradigm. Poriutesomai. Actually, why don't we all say that together? Poriutesomai. So, Tommy, poriutesomai. Very good, which is the passive, right? Passive of the lexical form of poriuomai, right? So there on your left, you can look on with us at the bottom left, and let's all say the lexical form together. It is poriuomai. One more time, poriuomai. Okay, and then when we look at the voice, right, meaning is it active, middle, or passive? This is a passive. Okay, let's start with with the voice. It is a passive because we see. Look with me there, Tommy, in the bottom right now, and praise. What's the signal that we have here? A passive. The theta and the eta. Actually, that comes after, but the theta is enough for you. See, again, like when you're learning Greek and you're learning languages, you don't always have to perfectly recognize the exact forms. All you have to know to see that it is a passive is to note that there's a theta. Just like all you have to know to recognize that it's a future is that there's a sigma, or, and we're going to get into this, something like a sigma that makes a sound like a sigma, okay? And you can start to think that through in your head. And maybe you won't remember that could be C. We'll get into this in a little bit. Maybe it could be a C instead of a sigma, or it could be a C instead of a sigma, right? Maybe you don't even remember that, but you remember it's something like that, right? And you can, okay, I can see. Oh, that's how I see how that works. I can, and maybe you don't remember the exact rule, but you remember, you can remember enough to recognize the form, right? So that's important. Don't think you have to memorize every detail to be able to explain it in the level of detail that I am right now to someone else. You need to be able to understand it in a level of detail to definitively identify the form. Okay, that's what we're going for. So at the bottom right, we're seeing a future passive indicative with a lexical form with a personal ending of Omicron, Mu, Alpha, Iota, right? So the paradigm verb is poreuomai. And in this case, we have poreutasomai. Let's all say that again together. Poreutasomai. Okay, and that is a future passive indicative, right? So Tommy, say it together with me. Future passive indicative. Everybody together. Future passive indicative. Passive form, and this is the key thing now, middle meaning. Okay, middle meaning. So this class of verbs, okay, here's the nuance in this, okay? If the lexical form ends as it does here with poreuomai, whether you see the same personal ending or you see the passive personal ending, it's always middle meaning. It's always middle meaning. But if you think about it, listen, don't get too vexed about this. Like, think about this. Like, if I say I walk or I go, you can't say I guess you could say I was walked if you're a dog, right? Right? You know, I was went doesn't make sense, right? So think about what's the minimum amount of information you need to actually be able to translate it. Like if I see something, you know, if I saw something that said poreutasomai, then I would have to know it has to be a middle meaning. I went or I came. If it's poreuomai, I went, I came. It can't be anything else, right? Because I wasn't like I was, went, right? You see, you follow me? Like, so your knowledge of the logic, the internal logic of the action of the verb will help you, even if you get a little confused about the form. Okay. Again, like my goal here is that you very quickly learn to read, right? You know, and everything we're doing here is to get you to the point where you're self-sufficient in reading the most basic types of Greek sentences. Once you do that, then you can start to learn on your own, and this starts to become self-reinforcing, right? Okay. All right, so that's a little bit about voice, and we see the distinction between the, you know, omega ending verbs and Omicron, Mu, Alpha, Iota, Omai. I have trouble saying Omai type of verbs, so I guess I always have to like spell it out. Verbs, we have future indicative verbs. Now we can look a little bit more at the morphology for these, you know, present and future and present forms. As we said, the difference is only the tense formative, the sigma. I always get ahead of myself in these slides because I feel like I don't want to leave you hanging when we start talking about it. But you can see the infixed tense formative, again, between the stem and the personal ending. Any questions there?
So if there's no future, no sigma, is it by default in the present tense?
Correct. That's exactly it. Yes.
So if I don't see an imperfect or a perfect or an epsilon or a sigma modifying it on the left or in the middle, just assume it's in the present tense.
If you don't see a sigma, assume present tense. Yes. Okay. If you see a sigma, could be future or could be one other type that we'll look at. Don't worry about it right now. This is your world right now. It just involves the future. So future active. So again, we have the stem, which is going to be lambda epsilon plus the tense formative, or the in this case, because the tense formative interrupts the stem and the connecting vowel. Remember that there were some contract verbs. So we had, like, remember there was luo and then there was poieo, but poieo, the epsilon and the omega merge, and so it was poieo, and it becomes a circumflex accent. Should we, just by way of reminder really quickly, I'm going to write that down just so you can remember what I'm talking about. So luo, you don't have to worry about. That's your stem, right? That's your personal ending right there. Okay. This is the lexical form in the first person active indicative. Okay. First person singular. When, and then you'll remember, goodness, I'm trying to crouch. Then you have verbs like this. Not very good. I have to improve my writing technique on
On the downhill.
On the downhill, yeah. This should be the lexical form that you'll find, but you'll never see this. You know, these like 3 vowels like this. What you will find should be this, or yo, right? Where the epsilon and the omega merge together like that, and then you have a circumflex accent instead of the strong accent, okay? All right, so I'm just, by way of reminder, there were contract verbs that we looked at.
Yeah, we need to review those at some point. I tried
Yeah.
reviewing it and it was like way over my head.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, like if I could, if you guys can try to find like all the charts and write them out a few times, it's not going to be perfect unless we, everybody repeats the course or you have a photographic memory, right? Yeah. So I need to give you, new material. But just for this point, look, I think it's all just important to remember there are contract verbs out there. There's epsilon, there are alpha, and there are omega contract verbs. Remember the thing with the contract verbs was that you may have difficulty remembering the merger rules, right? So when these connecting vowels and personal endings, which connecting vowel, the personal ending, what happens when you add that epsilon and the omega. I've done this a few times and now I know that. I have that memorized, but you don't need to have it memorized. You just need to be able to recognize it, and you will. Like it's much better. I think like even in this is I think it's better than the approach with Mounts where he has lots of information on how connecting vowels and how and personal endings merge with one another. But there is like a few pages where it gets really thick with all the rules, even in Merkle. You really just need to you may not be able to reproduce it actively, but you just need to be able to identify it passively, right? So in other words, when you see poyo, you're like, oh, I do or I make. So Tommy, if you if you don't know that much, then you just need to go back to your vocabulary list, right? Work through that vocabulary list, and you're going to look at the conjugation. It's going to be a little bit different, right? So it's going to be poyo, poyes, remember, poye. So it's a little bit different from the Luo paradigm, but you're going to see enough that you can identify it, and that's where you want to be. Okay, so back to the future active. So we have the stem, we have the infix, which is this tense formative here. The signet tells us the future in this case. We have the connecting vowel, which is the omicron, right? And then we have our personal ending here, which technically, because oftentimes people will take the connecting vowel and the personal ending together as the personal ending, but technically you have a connecting vowel omicron, and you have the personal ending mu, epsilon, nu, right? Okay. Put that all together, lusomen, okay? Lusomen, future, active, indicative, first person, plural. First person, plural. Because you remember, whoops, let's stay here for a second. You remember that this is the personal ending in the present active indicative. It's also the personal ending for the future active indicative. Okay, so let me just to write that one more time, make sure we're clear on what that is, right? So here we go. This is the paradigm vowel, verb, luo, right? And so if we look at the first person, singular, plural, remember? Then it was luo, and it was, Tommy, can you help me? Maybe it was luomen. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. With a strong accent over the epsilon. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So look at this. You got the, lumen, which is,
We have a reason.
yeah, we are loosing, we loose. Remember, there's a habitual case or sort of, habituated case that, where you do like a repetitive sort of iterative case where you do something continually. But yes, we are loosing. That could be one way of translating it. Now look at the difference. The difference is the tense formative here, which is the sigma, right? Does that make sense? So let's all say the future active indicative, first common plural together, lusomen. Lusomen. First person, present active indicative, first person plural, luomen. Luomen. Okay, good. Now, that's really all you need. And even if some of the other kind of finer rules of how you merge vowels or how, like, and you're going to see here in a moment, we're going to talk about how that sigma will shift. Even if you kind of forget some of those other things, you can usually kind of back into it based on what you already know about the personal ending, right? The personal ending. So if you look at luomen, you've already learned that. Now you see lusomen, you know that that's different, right? And up until this point, I mean, what have we learned? So present case, we've learned the imperfect, right? And now we've learned the future, okay? So to this point, if you see the sigma there, you know it's going to be you see the sigma, you know it's going to be a future. All right. All right, and then let's work through this. So there's no difference here in the personal endings again, but let's walk through this just to get some, or repeat this and drill this just to develop some familiarity, right? So we'll go down the columns again for both the singular and the plural, starting with the singular and then, first person to the third person. So all together, first person singular, luso, okay? Future, active, indicative, second person singular, luces. Future, active, indicative, third person singular, luce. Okay, now we're gonna do something different, so everybody get ready. Ben, now you're gonna lead us and take us through the future active indicative of the plural.
So first person, plural, future active indicative would be lusomen.
Lusomen.
Second person, plural, future active indicative is lucete.
Lucete.
Third person, plural, future active indicative would be lususin.
Lususi. Lususi. And notice remember the movable new?
Yeah.
So sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. So you might see it as lususi, or you might see it as lususin, okay? And by the way, this doesn't matter, but as a convention, oftentimes people use the tense form. So, you say future first, and then the voice active, the mood indicative, and then the person first, and whatever it is in this, right? And then the number.
Yeah.
So it don't just as a convention off. There's nothing special about it. It doesn't make it. But oftentimes, like when you're called upon to parse, you're gonna do it in that order. So it'd be future active indicative, first person singular plural, right? Or second person singular plural. All right. So how about you, Praise? Let's why don't you lead us and drill us through the future active indicative singular in the different persons, first person, second person, and third person.
Okay. Future active indicative, first person singular, luso.
Luso. Okay.
Future active indicative, second person singular, luces.
Luces.
And future active indicative, third person singular, luce.
Luce. Very good. All right, Tommy, now it's your turn. You can do the same thing. Take us through the future active indicative, singular, start with the first person. Future active indicative, first person singular of luo.
You don't want me to do plural?
We're gonna warm you up first with some with the singular. Future active indicative, first person singular.
Luso.
Okay, now take us through the second and the third person.
This future active indicative, second person singular. Luis.
Luces.
Luces.
Good.
Luces.
Luces.
Forgot the S. Third
Mhm.
person, future active indicative,
Yeah, future active indicative, third person singular, right?
Luis.
Luce.
Luis.
Luce. Okay, very good. Try that one more time. Take us through future active indicative. Start with the first person singular, and then work your way through each of the persons.
Luiso.
Future active indicative, first person singular.
That's what it is.
Here we go. Let's hear it, Tommy.
Luso.
Luso.
Luso, yeah.
Luso. Okay, good. All right.
And then second person singular, Luise or Luises.
Luces.
Luces.
Okay. All right.
And third person, Luise.
Okay, so future active indicative, third person singular. Luce.
Yeah.
Luce. Okay.
That's what I said.
Good. All right. One last time. Tommy, future active indicative, third person singular.
Luise.
Or Luce?
Luise.
Yeah. All right. Future active indicative, second person singular. Tommy.
Luises.
Luces.
Luises.
So lambda, upsilon, right?
Yeah.
So Lu, sigma, Lus, epsilon iota, that's a diphthong, becomes A and sigma. So Lu, Sace. Okay.
Luises.
All right. So future active indicative, second person singular. Tommy.
Luises.
Luces. Very good. Future active indicative, third person singular.
Luise.
Luce.
Luise.
Luce. Luce. Future active indicative, third person singular. Tommy.
Luise.
Luce. Very good. Future active indicative, second person singular.
Luises.
Luce.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Luces.
It's hard once you memorize it one way and then you're trying to throw an S
Yeah.
in the middle of your word, huh?
And what the funny thing is, in Greek, there's actually some examples, and in other languages too, where there is that sort of reversal of the sequence of the pronunciation sounds too, in certain cases.
Just to mess with.
All right, Tommy, future active indicative, third person singular. Slowly.
Luise.
Luce, yeah, there we go. Excellent. Future active indicative, second person singular.
Luises.
Luce is perfect. Very good. All right. And then one more just for fun.
Third person.
Yeah, so I was gonna say just for fun. So Tommy, how about the future active indicative, first person plural? And remember, future, not present.
Lusama.
Lusaman. Very good. All right, excellent. Okay. Yeah, good.
I don't know where the accent's coming. I don't know where.
So the linguists have done a lot of study and have shown that to effectively learn a language, you actually have to make mistakes, which is a fascinating insight. And they've looked at children and how they learn languages so quickly, and that's one of the universal characteristics is that they're not afraid to make mistakes and to practice. That's what we're here to do. Is we're here to practice. And that's one of the really key features of a really small group is that you can actually practice quite a bit and drill quite a bit. All right, so let's look at the future middle. So we got the stem, which Tommy is the lambda upsilon, right? And Ben, what's the tense formative?
Sigma.
Yeah, that's right. And then what's the connecting vowel? Praise. Sorry, I don't know what happened here, but it can you see it? You can kind of see it. It's a little squished.
Just ask me a hard question.
Oh, okay, I will. All right, and then the personal ending. Okay, what's the personal ending? Meta. Yeah, okay. All right, and then you add, well, you add the accent. You add the accent. In this case, you're going to add it over the.
He means like a vocal accent.
Why am I?
Southern
Oh,
slang.
yeah.
What am I doing?
No, actually, what you're doing is you're getting closer to what the real pronunciation is, because in English, we have many diphthongs. We don't have very many what they call pure vowels. More of Greek, I mean, there are diphthongs in Greek, but more of Greek are pure vowels. You know, it's not liu, it's lu, right? And it's not o, it's o. Okay, and so you're actually getting, you might think you're even making a mistake. You're actually getting closer to pronouncing Greek the way that it was pronounced both in classical times and in Koine and even in modern Greek. Okay, so that's good. You're developing an ear for the language. Okay, so we're looking at the future middle. So let's all say this together: lusometa. Lusometa, and yes, so this would be the future middle indicative, first person
I don't know.
plural.
Sounds fancy, sounds French.
Well, but remember, this is a pitch accent language, and it does have a beauty to it. It does have a time.
It's gonna sound a lot more like that when you're reading it fluidly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And of course, French has its own aesthetic to it, which I've been reminded of many times by people who are French, compared to English. All right. Future middle indicative. First person singular altogether, lusomai. Lusomai. One more time, lusomai. Future middle indicative, second person singular, luce. Okay, note that iota subscript under the eta. Right. So altogether, first future middle indicative, second person singular is luce. Future middle indicative, third person singular, lucitai.
Lose the top.
If that helps you. But remember, okay, so, and again, like I think when I teach this again, I'm going to move through this a little bit differently from what Merkel and Plummer do. Remember back to your paradigm verb for the present active indicative, okay? Instead of the future middle indicative, or actually now let's move on to the middle, right? Instead of the future middle indicative, let's look at the present middle indicative, and the third person singular would have been, do you remember what it would have been? Luotai, exactly, without the sigma, right? Okay. All right, future middle indicative, first person plural, lusometa. Lusometa. Future middle indicative, second person plural, lucista. Okay, future middle indicative, third person plural, lusontai. Lusontai. Okay, very good. All right, so then let's all do this all together. We're going to go down the columns, first for the singular and then for the plural. In the future, middle, indicative. Okay, ready? Future, middle, indicative, starting with the first person singular is lusomai. Second person singular, luce. Third person singular, lucitai. Future middle indicative, first person plural, lusometa. Future middle indicative, second person plural, luciste. Third person plural, lusontai. Yeah, very good, Tommy. Great pronunciation. Excellent. All right. So that's encouraging. And let's keep moving here because you're doing pretty well with this. I'm actually going to bring all this up at once. Okay, so this is just kind of summarizing a little bit about what we've been talking about. So remember, in the present active indicative, the paradigm verb is luo, and the middle or the passive, sometimes called the mediopassive, right? Because you can, occasionally have passive forms that have a middle meaning, right? Luomai. Then the imperfect, remember we learned the imperfect as well. So this is we're not going to go through the entire paradigm here, but in the active, first person, singular, right? Imperfect, active, first person singular was eluon. So Tommy, say eluon.
Other one.
Are you following where we're at here? Maybe I should help
I
fight.
am there because the epsilon was what drew me
The
there.
epsilons, that's right. So remember the augment. So when we see the augment, you can, up to this point, the only verb form you've learned that has the augment, the epsilon augment, is imperfect. Imperfect, right? All right, so the imperfect active and then the imperfect middle passive, eluomane. Eluomane. Okay, all right. So the imperfect is a little bit different. You see the personal endings are different for the imperfect. And now we're learning the future. And again, just to summarize what we've already seen, it is very much correspondent to the present form, except for the addition of the tense formative, right? Which in the base form here, this sort of standard form would be just a sigma. Okay, we're going to see some shifts on that too. But now that we know that, they should be pretty simple for us to understand. Okay, so we're going to look at the future passive again. So we overviewed it. Now let's go back through it and kind of break it down into the parts again. So here we have the stem, which is lambda epsilon, and then the passive ending, which is sigma, omicron, mu, epsilon, theta, alpha. Now,
They made it.
yeah. Now, so the thing is, in reality, like we already said, there is the, okay, look, so there's the tense formative, right? There is a connecting vowel and there's a personal ending. But remember, you don't need to know all that. All you have to remember is what happens is when you get a sigma, an omicron, a mu, an epsilon, a theta, okay, and an alpha. Now you know that you have the past, you have the future ending, right? Future passive ending, first person plural, okay? So even if you can't break that down anymore, at least you know it's first person, plural, future, passive, okay? Now, I should say, if you have sigma, omicron, so somatep, you have the future first person plural, right? And then the passive comes from the addition of the theta and the eta. You see that? You add the theta and the eta, and now you have not just a future first person common plural, but you have a future passive first common plural, right? Okay.
I feel like I'm trying to read an incantation from some ancient language.
Well, it looks like it, but again, remember, the only thing you really need to, if you can, again, think of it like this. Okay, I see a sigma in there, future. I see a theta in there, passive, right? So Tommy, if you see a theta between the stem and the rest of the personal ending, along with the, tense formative, connecting vowel, personal ending. Okay. Oh, all right. Future passive, right? There you go. And then you're going to remember, okay, this is the personal ending. You'll at least remember this much of it and say, that's the, okay, future, or that's the first person plural, right? And specifically, when you look at this, we have the middle passive form here, right? So luomai, that's the first person singular, first person plural, luomete, right? Okay. So it may seem like it's a lot, but all this stuff will start to confuse. And you've actually, at this point, you've actually learned most of the finite verb system in Greek. There's only one other major tense after this to learn. There are other ones, but there's only one other major one. There's the perfect and the pluperfects, but the aorist is the only other major tense there is after this. And so you're almost there. Okay, so future passive indicative.
My computer just
Did it die?
reset.
Okay. How about this? Let's do an audible here. Ben, can you maybe just come up?
Yeah.
And I hate splitting up couples, but maybe you can, or actually maybe you can just put your, maybe if you put your computer where praise is, and then we can. I'll move this just a touch right here. Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll hot swap seats, and we're still ready to go.
I do have an older computer.
Okay.
I can't figure it out.
Just say no minimize button.
What's that?
No minimize button.
Well, because I split the screen so I have the book up and then the display, but it makes it really small. Helps. Okay, there we go. What's that one? That one.
Okay. So let's break down the parts again. We started to, and again, we have the passive ending. We have the addition of theta and eta, right? So the passive ending here, future, passive. All right. And then the addition of the theta, theta eta after the stem. Okay. Okay, so now we'll just go through the paradigm again, but what's important to remember, so here we're looking at the future passive indicative, that it corresponds to the present passive indicative, okay? With the difference being that we have here the theta and so Tommy, theta, eta, right?
Yeah.
Theta, eta, theta, eta.
How do you
Passive.
even pronounce this, like the second person?
Okay,
It's a lot.
all right. But I just want to make sure, again, sigma, future, right? The oh my, which is telling us that this is going to be, passive. And then here we have, or middle passive form. Yeah. So, okay. Luthesomai or luthesomai. So let's actually go through that. So let's go down the columns again. So future passive indicative, beginning with the singular forms. So first person, luthesomai. Future passive indicative, second person singular, luthese. With the iota subscript under the last eta, right? Future passive indicative, third person singular, lutesetai. And then future passive indicative, first person plural, lutesomata. Lutesomata. Let's actually say it slowly all together. Lutesomata. 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 Yes. Future passive indicative, second person plural. Lutesista. Lutesista. Yeah, that one. Okay. All right. So again, first we'll break it down. So you have the stem, right? This is from your lexical form, except for the omega, right? At the end. So luo, you have your stem, the base form of the verb. And then we actually go over here to look at the personal ending. And we note that this is actually the middle passive form, right? for the second person plural. So lueste would be second person plural, present active indicative. You, all, loose, release, destroy. Okay, so now we got the stem. You got your stem, you got your personal ending, and then what's this right here? The sigma, which tells us that it's in what tense form? Future. So Tommy, we see the sigma here. Future, that's right. And then now we see the theta and the eta, and that's telling us passive grammatical form, right? Specifically future passive, right? Okay, and then slowly pronouncing it, lu, te, ses, te. That's it. You got it. Lu, te, ses, te.
Sounds like a good sauce.
Yeah. Lu, te, ses, te. Lu, te, ses, te. Okay. All right.
It's a destroyed sauce in this case.
Yeah. All right. And then future, passive, indicative, third person, plural. Lutasontai. Yeah, very good. Yeah, got it. Oh, and of course it says down here, the endings of the future passives are the same as the future middle with the addition of the theta, eta. Okay. And we can also say that the ending of the future passives are like the present middle with the, addition of the theta, eta, and the sigma. All right. Okay. There we go. All right. Stem variations. Now, this is the part, don't worry too much about trying to memorize this right now. You'll see some examples in your exercises and you'll work through it. Again, you just want to be able to recognize it when it happens. Now, we said a sigma is added to form this tense formative that tells us that it's the future tense. However, there are some changes that happen to the sigma in terms of pronunciation because it follows, here it says it's because, Greek characters are hard to pronounce. The way that, to say that a little bit more technically, there's morphological rules. There's just ways that you form sound. Every language has rules in the way that you form sound. Tommy.
So instead of using songs like Plummer and Merkel suggest, what if we used like role play or like D&D spell casting with these words?
Well, I'm not going to condone that, but I can see the logic of it. I don't know if that's right to say. It does seem that foreign, huh? Okay, so so maybe it'll actually help first. Yeah, see, this is where I would do this a little differently. If I could, and I think I will do this differently next time, just remember luo first, okay? In your mind, right above where it says sozo here, remember sozo, save, deliver, rescue, right? So above this, in your mind, I want you to write luo. Can you see it, Tommy, in your mind?
Why am I putting Lua above save?
Just bear with me. Can you see it can you see it?
I got the next card making, yeah.
Luo, okay?
Luo.
And if you can't see it, I think it's up there somewhere. Yeah, well, luo is there. Yeah. Okay. And now I want you to imagine the future. In fact, actually, let's do this.
You're making this really hard not to turn this into like role play.
Yeah, it does have this sort of like a little bit of an incantation feel to it. I haven't really thought about Greek that way before. Okay. So, luo, present active indicative, right? Now, if we want the future, what do?
Add a sigma.
Add a sigma, the tense formative in there. So, luso, right? There we go. All right.
So Dr. Ben is in danger and I'm going to loose him out of his trouble.
Yeah, could happen that way, and hopefully it'll be around. Okay. Now let's look at the example here. Sozo. Sozo. Okay, with iota subscript under the omega, zeta. Sozo. In its base form, it actually would have a strong accent over the first omega there in the lexical form. So sozo, but now look, we have a zeta, right? We have the zeta there. Now think about what happens when you add a sigma, okay? Now there's a really good discussion of Merkel and Plummer on all the mechanics behind this. So we may or may not get to all the different rules, but right now, I want you to at least just make the sound like a Z sound. Think about where your tongue is as you're making that sound. Tommy? So make an S sound. Now make a Z sound. Is that the same place in your mouth that you're making that sound? Oh, it is. Okay.
Nice.
If you think about it, the only difference is that one is voiceless and the other one is voiced. Right? So it's the same sound. One is voiced, one is unvoiced. Okay. So here's what happens when you add the voiced z. You with me?
Yeah.
To the unvoiced.
You're basically saying that the sigma is silent.
I'm saying that the voiced one goes away. Okay. You can say that they merge, but actually that voiced sound from the zeta drops out, and you just get the sigma right here.
Sozo.
So. Yeah.
Sozo becomes so-so.
So. Yeah. I can. Yeah. So it's not sigma, omega, zeta, sigma, omega, right? The zeta
are just too hard to make.
Well,
connection with each other.
that's the way that the text describes it.
There's more
it's-
to it.
The better, probably, but still simple way to say it is there are rules. Okay, there are morphological rules for how sounds are made, but you can start to see the logic of it, right? If you have two sounds that are almost the same, and one of them just goes away, right? So
Yeah,
it
that's what silent is for.
so it becomes voiceless. So when you have a voiced consonant, z, and you have a voiceless consonant, sigma, right? The voice consonant drops out. So you end up with so-so, okay? All right, now listen, you can forget what I just told you, but if you remember the base form, the lexical form, which is sozo, right? And you remember that somehow in the future it makes a transformation and becomes so. Okay, you're a little. You might be a little so on the mechanics behind that, but at least you can remember it, and that's all right. Okay, so that's one change, right? So Tommy, there would be a zeta here, but it drops out, right?
Yeah.
Ben. Okay. Now, here's another kind of change that's related to that. Do you remember pempto? What is pempto? The lexical form, what does it mean? Oh, pempo, excuse me. That's yeah. To send, like I send, right? Okay. And if you were to add a sigma, now think about this, right? Like make a P sound, like a P sound with the aspiration, like the voice, like, you know, or with the puff of it, right? So, right? And okay, so what does that sound together in Greek? There already is a letter for that, right? Is psi. Psi. Do you see that, Tommy? Okay.
The only problem with that is that it takes out the sigma, so I have no idea that this is perfect.
Correct.
Okay, but actually make the psi sound, okay? Slowly, right? Right now, say s. Is the sigma still in there? Is the sigma sound still in there? Okay, hint. The answer is yes.
Not visually.
Yeah, not
Okay.
visually.
It's not written, or I should say it's written differently, because in Greek, you actually have one letter in Greek. There's actually more than one letter, but this letter is a digloss. It's written with one letter, but it represents two sounds.
So let's say I saw this word in a verse. How would I know that it's in the perfect tense because the sigma's not there?
It's not perfect. You're going to know that it's the future. This is the thing. Okay, listen. You can either just, and this is how I learned it before I learned all the morphological rules. I remember tempo. Probably at some point in my Greek text, it probably did say, or maybe the professor had mentioned that it turns into a psi. When I was learning Greek, they didn't break down the mechanics for us like this or drill with us the way that I am with you, right? So I'm not sure how I learned this, but at some point I learned pempso actually means I will send, not I send, but I will send, right? If that's what you remember, then that's okay. As long as you remember that's what it means. If you ask somebody who knew Koine Greek, and I suppose a modern Greek speaker, pempso, can you break down why that is the future active indicative instead of pemp so with a p and a sigma? Maybe or maybe not would they be able to tell you, right? But they know it, and they know it's spelled with a psi, so that's what matters. But I do think like these, like if it's much better than singing a song or doing a dance or any of those things, is to actually make the sounds in your mouth, and you can see it. Is C, right? It's the digloss. It's that letter C, right? And that will help you to remember it. So now if you see
One quick question.
mhm.
So the sigma in general can mean future tense or perfect tense or just future.
It means future. Up till now, that's the only thing you've learned. You will find, let's just stick with what you've known until now. If you see the sigma, think future tense. If you see the sigma between the stem and the personal ending with the connecting vowel, then future. Okay.
What's really helpful with reading it is knowing the vocabulary words. There's just no substitute for knowing the vocabulary words, because if you know pempo is the root word, and you're like, I know pempo is a word, but what I'm seeing here is pempso. That's probably pempo, and it's being messed with in the center, and then you can figure out, okay,
Right.
well, what's different, and then what does that tell me?
And that's how I learned, right? So
Yeah, that's
no
why.
one reviewed like these,
The rules of why.
and you don't even need to remember them, but I do think they're, number one, I think it helps you to understand the language a little bit better, like why the sounds are what they are. And I think it's a memory aid, so that in the future, when you see some of these changes, it just, yeah, that makes sense to me, But if you don't remember them, that's okay. That's why I said for this section, don't worry about the rules. Just, can you just, as Ben said, can you know the lexical form and then recognize the future form? All right. There's more. So now if you think about it, and again, like if this helps you, then great. This helps me, even though it was too late in a sense for me. But if this helps you, then it's great. If not, then don't worry about it. But think about it. Duh, z, p, p. They're all like dentals, meaning they cut the back of your front teeth. Got it? When you're making that sound, okay. Now, when you add the sigma, like that tense formative in there, it will turn into a xi. Mm-hmm. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. No. Yeah, we're getting. Yeah, I'm mind melt. Like the neurons are all snapping and melting together in my head. Sorry. When you get dentals and you add a sigma, just like the example we just saw, of course, it will shift to sigma. Okay. It just all shifts to a signal. So to a sigma. So doxas, remember the root was doxazo. Do you remember that? Which was to glorify. And then now the future is doxaso. Doxaso. Okay. So instead of zeta, which would be the present, now you have a sigma, which is the future. Yeah, you got it. All right. So these are stem variations. And then there's a whole other, these are called velars or palatals. They're made in the back of your mouth, like that soft palates. So it could be g, gamma, kappa. Now think about it. Gamma and kappa are the same. They're with I believe they're called plosives, but they're basically, stops. But one is voiced and one is unvoiced. So g and k, right? And then at the end of that list, you see the key there. Looks like an X, right? Key. And of course, you remember. That's actually made a little farther back in your throat. So if like German, it'd be Booth, but it's made in the back, right? So when you have gamma, kappa, sigma, kappa, or two sigmas together, or key, and you add the sigma, the tense formative, then you get the C, okay? So remember dioko? What is dioko?
Diakonos.
Not close, but that's actually different roots, similar sound. Dioko meant to pursue or to persecute or to chase, okay? Dioko. So, and it doesn't have it on there, so I'll write it here just to make sure we're totally clear on this. So we have, this is the present form, right? Or the dictionary lexical form, right? Dioko, pursue, chase, persecute. Now, when you go to the plural, you're going to add that sigma, right?
The future.
Yeah, to get to the future, right? And so now this in the future becomes dioxo. Okay, I pursue, I chase, I persecute, right?
Oh no, here comes Paul. He's gonna Doko me.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I think any kind of word pictures you come up with will help you with all this stuff. All right, and then the last class are the labials. In Spanish, labio means lips, labios, and all these sounds are made with the lips. So remember B, which is, by the way, you don't have the sound. There is a difference between P and P. So the old, like the anglicized or kind of traditional Erasmian pronunciation of phi or phi would be, be phi. But actually, this is when you think about, let's take a very simple word. Take the word like pat, pat, pat. You can actually put your hand in front of your face and you can feel, right? You can feel the puff of air that comes out. Now say that word as a palindrome, and flip it around, and now it's tap, tap, tap. Not the same sound, is it?
Nope.
It's spelled the same way, but it's not the same sound. So when you see P, it is non-aspirated. There's not this puff of air. When you see phi, it is with that puff of air, right? So it's p versus tap. Okay, it's like a pop versus a puff. All right. Okay. So P, right? And then beta, like think about where this, like beta, where's that sound coming from? Oh, that's the voiced version, right? Of P, right? Or P. And then beta, like epsilon, right? Of course it's with the C. And of course, when you add any of those with the sigma, that is what you get. You get the C, the digloss in Greek. It's two sounds together. So remember blepo? Do I need to write it up there? Should I write it? Blepo?
I'm gonna blepo you
Blepo, I see, right? So I'll do that up here. So this is IC.
Thought it was I sent.
No, that's Pempo. Yeah, that's the example we just looked at. So Pempo. Ew, that's ugly. Yeah, there we go. Pempo. I send. Blepo, I see, right? And then what's the transformation here? So Tommy, if we had to take the P and then we add the future tense formative, which is stigma, then we end up with a C. And so this becomes, yeah, lepso, exactly. I will see. Okay. So these, like on the surface, these all look like they're very, it looks like there's a lot of variation, but you'll either recognize them by sight or you can kind of reproduce some of the mechanics the way we just did here. So this is just going over what we just looked at, so again, when you add all the dentals together with sigma, you end up with sigma. So from sozo to soso. Let me write that one more time. Feel really like schizophrenic with the board on the side over here.
I'd actually be
Yeah, I
behind you, right?
can't even right here. So remember soso. Is that right?
To save.
Sozo.
Sozo, yes, sozo. So sozo, I save, I preserve, I deliver. That's a very common word in Greek and in the New Testament too. And then we add the zeta and then the sigma to get to the future. That becomes just a sigma. So now it's so. Yeah. So I will give, I will preserve, I will heal. That's another sense of it. I will deliver. All right. But the rest of this is just what we just went over. So why don't we move past that? You can take a look at it again. I know the first couple of weeks they're actually kind of the hardest because this is where you have to kind of catch up. Because,
everything you've done, move on to the
plus you have to so you're reading ahead 2 chapters to get caught up to this one, and you're going to read chapter 11 next week, right? So you're trying to catch up by getting ahead, and it just makes this time work a lot better because we're only meeting once a week, so I know that's asking more than from a typical class, but let's try to keep that cadence. Stem variations, contract verbs, and the future tense. So in the future tense, I think we said this earlier, like when you had contract verbs like poieo, now you're going to add that sigma in there, and it's not going to be able to contract anymore, right? So let's see, the example that they use is kaleso, I will call. Oh, that's not very helpful. Hang on, I thought it had more. Just a moment. What's going on? Oh, sorry, I'm moving in the wrong direction. Yeah, that's all right. I thought there was more in here, and maybe did I accidentally delete it? Delete self to add some more content onto the slide for the future, but okay. So remember, like kaleo was a contract verb, right? So kappa, alpha, lambda, epsilon, omega, kaleo, I call. All right, I call. Very common in the New Testament, very common in Koine Greek, and very common in classical Greek, kaleo. Now remember that because you have an epsilon and omega, this is the lexical form. When you see it actually as the first present active indicative, first person singular, you're going to see it like this, with the epsilon and the omega merged, and then that accent becomes a circumflex. So kalo, and that means I call, right? Now remember, I'm going to actually go up so I don't just keep, I don't know, I guess I'll get some here. So here, since we don't have a ton of board space here, but for the future, Okay, so you have the stem right here. Now remember, you have the tense formative, right? So this is present, active, indicative, tense formative, sigma, and then the present, active, indicative, first person, plural, personal ending, right? Now the sigma comes in between the omega and the epsilon, so they no longer contract. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's kaleso. So note to self on that in this slide. You probably have that already included on there, since we don't have a board right behind us here. And I guess this is a little bit of review. So like, as we said already, you know, when you have alpha, epsilon, and omega, or sorry, omicron type contract verbs, you know, so kaleo would be the epsilon type, right? Trying to think of these off the top of my head. What other ones would be? And for some reason I can't right off the top of my head, but there's others that end with like an alpha at the end of the stem. And there's others that end with an omega at the end of the stem. So there's those three types. Okay, agapao. So I do have examples here. Agapao. And then with the future, okay, so now here I do want you to see that it lengthens, right? So you still get the lengthening, but it doesn't contract, right? So the alpha then lengthens to eta, and the omega, but the omega and the alpha, they can't merge together anymore because they've been separated by the sigma. Okay. I have to think of an example in my mind because I can't remember the one that's in here. It's not right for me not to know.
For
And-
which one?
An omicron contract verb.
Oh,
Okay.
it's hard to think of.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an example. I mean, I know many of them, but I just can't think off the top of my head like which one would fall into that. All right. So future indicative verbs. So this is just one you just need to commit to memory because it's just so frequent in the Greek text of the New Testament, and that's the future indicative of a me. So esomai, so going, singular and plural. Esomai, esse, estai, plural, esomata, esiste, esontai. Okay, so you can notice that it's the middle passive endings from the first, from the present form, and you just you just basically just add like it's an epsilon and then a sigma for the future, and there you go. I guess the only difference would be the third person singular. Instead, it's not estetai, it's estai. Yeah. And Merkel and Plummer talk about the logic behind that morphological change in the text, but that's pretty easy. So that's pretty easy. If you've already memorized the middle passive forms for the present active indicative. Let's see, what else can we say about this? Sorry, that looks like this got shifted over for some reason. There's something else I wanted to note on this. I think the only thing that's really important is, again, like these are very common. So all the different forms of a me, right? So we've learned the present, we've learned the imperfect, and now we're learning the future. So those are important too.
What does that word mean again?
I am, in some instances, I
exist.
I exist, or yeah, it's a verb of existence.
Yeah.
Yes. Mhm. I will be, you will be, he will be, we will be,
They will be,
you all will be, they will be, yeah.
y'all will be.
Mhm. So why don't we drill through that just like once? Let's see. Yeah, let's drill through this one time. So future indicative of amen. Let's again go down the column, starting with the singular for each person. So future indicative of amen, first person singular, esomai. Future indicative of amen, second person singular, esse. Third person singular, estai. First person plural, esomata. Second person plural, esiste. Third person plural, esontai. Mhm. All right. Yes. All right. And I'm still kind of torn on this because I do like putting the vocabulary, kind of layering this in, but then it also, I feel like it kind of interrupts the flow a little bit. You just need to go, take one day for vocabulary and then have some flashcards or write them down. I always wrote stuff down. That's more helpful for me. So I'd always write vocabulary down. Just if you do that 2 or 3 times a week, just for a few minutes, you're going to pick this up. But anoigo, I open. Apaluo, I set free, dismiss, divorce. So I think we already looked at, yes, we did look at compound verbs that included prefix prepositional elements. And we noted that there were different cases. In some cases, the meaning with the additional, luo, right, which is what we have here. We have the prefix preposition apo, which is added to it. In this particular case, it has a different meaning. So it's not I destroy, but rather I set free, I dismiss, or it's even the word that's used for divorce, right? So sometimes that compound form will have a different meaning. Sometimes it will have an intensified meaning that's related to the root. So for instance, actually here, the same root, kataluo. So I don't think it's part of vocabulary, but that would mean to thoroughly destroy, to completely destroy, right? So could be the same meaning. It could be a different meaning. It could be an intensified meaning, or it can be a meaning that's explained by breaking down what the preposition means and then adding it to what the base verb means, right? And in some sense, this is kind of like that. So like at least some of the senses of apaluo. So remember apo, it meant away or from, right? So to release away, you can kind of start to get the sense of dismiss or divorce from that, right? Right? To send away or to release away, right? Okay. Arco, I rule or I begin. Yeah, and that's an interesting one. There's a famous case in the very first chapter of the book of Acts. I think it's actually the first verse where in many translations, Luke is recorded as saying, in the first volume, O Theophilus, I began to write about all the things that Jesus did and taught. And so there's some who would take that to be translated that way. I began, right? And it does mean that sometimes, or I rule. I think it also has another sense, and I think this is the sense in Acts chapter 1 of to construct an orderly account of something, or to assemble or to organize something. And in English we have the word like architectonics. I don't know if you've heard of that word. So there's a few combined. Yeah.
It's a combination of words that I've heard, but I've never
Yeah.
heard that word.
Yeah, architectonics is, it's the way it's actually the study of classification or taxonomy, like how you organize things. And I think that that's the sense in which that Luke intended it he was trying to create an orderly, proper account.
It's like if you put those, because those two seem very different, right? I rule and I begin. They seem
Yeah.
very, very different. So if you look for a middle ground between those two, like that idea, I think that's where the idea of an order. I have used a rule to begin putting this into an order. It almost seems to be like a halfway in between. Like,
Yeah, so
there is
sometimes
a rule to this.
there
I have
is,
ordered it. I rule over it.
yeah, you can see, you can trace sort of the semantic range, looking at, some literal
Yeah.
and then some figurative, or some literal, and then some sort of kind of compounded or adjacent sort of semantic domains. So some verbs you can find that. Sometimes you can't, at least not very easily, So
I heard recently, sorry, sort of off topic, but that the idea behind that in Luke was less of what we think of as putting something in order chronologically, because when we order something, that's how we order it. And that Luke may have been a parasha, a companion reading with the law. And there have been guys who've been trying to line up Luke with what you would have been reading out of the law at the same time as a Jewish reader. And that might have been Luke's intention, was to read them together and see Christ and the law and read these things simultaneously. And I was like, I've never heard that before. That's a fascinating thought, but I haven't seen a full layout of what it looks like to be able to tell if that actually.
yeah, really,
reads
that's
out.
interesting reading. If you find
But I
that,
was like, that would be fascinating if that.
yeah,
Because I mean,
if you find a reference for that, send that to me.
yeah,
That's
I'll
something
try and find. See, the guy who I was hearing that from had.
Drop it into our
source.
chat.
Yeah, he had a source he was trying that.
Drop it
was
into our Slack chats.
Working on that.
Yeah.
Oh, I need to update the lamentation.
You need to add some additional woes to the lamentation. Okay, let's keep going here. So anoigo, I open, apaluo, to set free, dismiss, divorce. Manumit, I think, is also the word that, so like when you release a slave, I think that's the word that's used. Arco, I rule, I order, I begin, I believe. Prasieuchomai, I pray. Proskuneo, I worship, a very important and frequent word in the New Testament. Sunago, I gather or bring together. So remember, we said that oftentimes there are relationships between the constituent semantic elements of these compound words. So sunago, ago, we remember, means I lead, and soon is the preposition that means together or with, right? So to lead together or to lead with, and this would fall under that category. And so the word synagogue, leading people together, from this word root meaning to, and the verbal root meaning to bring. Archae, the beginning, from which we get the English word archaic. Daimonion, demon or spirit. Didaskalos, a teacher. We get the word didactic. Chronos, which of course it means throne. Hemation, so that's a very frequent word in the New Testament. Clothing. And karpos, fruit or crop. Tommy, say karpos.
Carpos.
Ploion. Oh, I can't believe we haven't had this one yet, but that's also very frequent. Ploion. And then we also, we talked about the English transliteration of synagogue.
Synagogue.
The assembly, right, or synagogue. Yeah. Always helpful when you have a word that's transliterated to replace the transliteration with a translation. So synagogue is not a particularly interesting word when you substitute assembly for synagogue, although it does have some interesting kind of overtones to it because it's the assembly. There's a sort of, doesn't mean that these are not theologically distinct entities. I think they are, but there's this idea of bringing people together in the Jewish assembly, which was the synagogue, right? And then the ecclesia, which is the church, and that means to call some people out, but then to call them out together, right? So you can see there's different verbal roots, but some overlap in kind of the some of the semantic implications. That's not always the case too, I should say, because when you sometimes look, if you try to parse a word in Greek or in any language, it doesn't always yield the actual meaning. I'll give you like an example in English. So the word goodbye, do you know what the word goodbye, what that root, the root phrase is behind that expression? It's from a medieval English expression. It's essentially God be with ye. Goodbye, right?
Mm.
So, but there's atheists who say goodbye today, right? So always you always have to exercise caution, when you try to parse words, try to understand the meaning by parsing
where you are in history makes a big difference.
the lexical the morphemes. Mhm, yeah. Okay, and then kara, joy, from which you get the word charity.
It just sounds so joyful.
Kara, yeah. So I was just talking about this with, who was I talking about this with? A friend of mine. I don't know what I think my just my memory just took a break over the past week or two. Maybe it's because I had so much other stuff going on. I'm not remembering conversations very well from recent events. But I was just talking about this with someone. There is, I think, some very sophisticated. I believe this is my hypothesis, is that there's in Hebrew some very sophisticated sound correspondence and onomatopoeia. So there's certain words that involve physical striking or violence or aggression, and my hypothesis is that they have a higher preponderance of guttural sounds. So that's something I want to try to explore one day. But I've just noticed that as I've been reading through now in Deuteronomy. So I've been reading through the Hebrew Bible, and I'm now in Deuteronomy, and that's one of the things that struck me this time as I've been reading. So there is something to be said for that. That sometimes there's again onomatopoeia, which is correspondence between the type of the sound and the idea that it expresses.
And Hebrew would be more prone to that than Greek, wouldn't it? Or is that?
I think so, but I can't
because it's got not just that it's more character based, but it's it doesn't really have the vowels.
So I'd like to tell you, there's certain
I've read very well at all.
Well, but I've read the biblical languages for a long time, and you develop a certain sense about things.
Yeah.
But you really need someone to do a detailed study on that topic, right? So you're relying not just on perception and sense, but detailed observation and analysis. However, I do think that, subjectively, yes. As I've been reading through the Hebrew Bible, especially this time as I'm going through it, I'm finding that it seems that some of these concepts of again, aggression, violence, they seem to have higher preponderance of guttural sounds with them. But that's something that you would want to test, right? That's actually something to be fairly easy to test as a hypothesis, right? Because, and if you think about how you would do this, and just take a couple minutes, before we wrap up here, probably the way that you would design an experiment like that is you would start with a lexicon and then probably categorize, right? All words as, having a negative or positive connotation, or violent versus, conciliatory, right? And then you could do simple word counts of, guttural sounds, and then see if you can find a correlation between those sounds and the perceived tone of the gloss, right? The English gloss, that's something you could do. But
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
All right. Well, we're learning. I think, like, again, I'm realizing now that it's great having a smaller group like this, because you just end up making a lot more progress.
Yeah.